just love at first sight, although he didn't get the opportunity to delve into that market until many years later, after he had met and married my grandmother. My grandfather ended up meeting my grandmother at a tent revival meeting where my grandmother's father, Reverend Edgar Bethany, was preaching. My grandmother had recently been expelled from college, much to her father's shame and embarrassment. My grandmother was looking for a way to settle down and please her father at the time she met my grandfather, and my grandfather was looking for someone who could fill the role of pastor's wife, since he had recently finished up his studies at the Central Bible Institute in Missouri in 1955. They married in 1957 and began their life together in Rapid City, South Dakota. They spent 4 years there after my grandfather took a position as an announcer for a local radio station. He was a natural for the position and quickly worked his way to head of the station. They also served as co-pastors for a small church on the side while my grandmother took a few odd jobs in order to make ends meet. Interestingly enough, my grandparents' recollection of the early days of their marriage vary significantly. If you ask my grandfather what it was like, he would tell you about how he used to hunt deer and bring it home for my grandmother to cook, or tell a funny story about how their car had gotten stuck in the mud. In order to get it unstuck, he had my 8 months pregnant grandmother sit on the trunk of the car to weigh it down enough to gain the necessary traction to dislodge it. It was an overall optimistic view of a simple life. They were young and poor, but seemed to make the most of their days together. In drastic contrast, listening to my grandmother's stories of her marriage was like listening to something out of an episode of Tales from the Crypt, too horrifying and bizarre to be reality. Right before I was preparing to marry my college sweetheart, Michael, my grandmother kept telling me how lucky I was to have found someone so gentle and handsome. I commented that she hadn't done so bad herself with Papa, which immediately sent a rage through her soul that I could see flare out of her eyes. She waved her hands in the air and said, "Papa? Please. He used to treat me like a punching bag. You wouldn't believe the shit he's put me through." Clearly, I was a bit dumbfounded because, although I didn't really have a close relationship with my grandfather at this point, I couldn't imagine him ever being violent with anyone. I could see that he had a bit of a temper and a sharp tongue, but violent? I thought that would have been the worst of it, but then she went on. "Did you know I used to have to go lay myself behind his car to keep him from going out and having sex with other men? He used to get so trashed he'd take our car to the public restrooms to solicit sex from men. I had to pick him up from there one time. It was disgusting." Okay, she had me now. Where exactly was she going with this? I had always heard rumors that my grandfather was gay, but it was never anything that had bothered me that much. I thought it was another silly rumor people made up in order to make another religious right-wing public figure look like a hypocrite. According to my grandmother, however, not only was it 100% true, it was clearly something my grandfather had been struggling with for a long time. It breaks my heart knowing my grandfather must have endured such an internal struggle and strife with himself. I believe it may have been what led to his excessive drinking and self-medication that ultimately weakened his heart and diminished his mental capacities to the point 3 years before his passing we were having to keep things from him and dumb things down to the point a grade school child could understand them. To say my grandfather was an alcoholic would have been an understatement. He was just an addict. It didn't matter if it were alcohol, prescription drugs, Afrin, or herbal tea. Anything that made him feel good and gave him a temporary high became a daily routine. He and my grandmother were living with their 2 sons, my father, Paul Jr., and my uncle Matt in Southern California in the mid-1960s. My grandfather had taken a job as the general manager for a local radio station in Corona, California. In 1970, he left to manage 2 Christian stations, 1 radio and 1 television, located in San Bernardino, California. It was during this time that they received an opportunity to rent a few hours of airtime from a local television station. They teamed up with Jim and Tammy Faye Backer, 2 local ministers they were friendly with at the time, and went to work.